Yo, welcome to the lab. Today, I want to share 8 underrated podcasts that you should be listening to. You know me, Mark Savant, obsessed with creating better content in less time. I want you to get the most value for your time as possible. And then I want you to take that time, that value, that content you create and turn that into income. Okay. And a lot of this is mindset, it's mentality, it's doing the right things, it's building momentum, it's getting a little bit better, yada, yada, hard work pays off. All that stuff is still true. But I think one of the things that's not talked about enough, and something that I struggle with personally, is the content that you consume directly impacts the way that you act and the actions that you take. Okay, it's like mom used to say, junk in, junk out, bad in, bad out. It's the same thing. If you're spending all your time watching soap operas and reality TV, you're not going to be outputting at a high level. So today we're going to break down 8 what I would consider underrated podcasts. We're not talking tiny podcasts, but podcasts that you maybe haven't listened to in a while, or maybe you haven't listened to before. So I'm going to give you 8 different podcast ideas for you to check out. Okay. Now, all these ideas were recommended in Clubhouse. And I love Clubhouse. We meet some amazing people in there. So many great shows were shared. But today I want to share all the shows I think that are going to be super relevant to you, to that business owner, the content creator who wants to create better content in less time. So let me start out with the first podcast that's underrated that you need to listen to. That's Underdog Empowerment by Zachary Babcock. I love Underdog Empowerment for a few different reasons, but one of the things that's really impressed me about the show is just the knowledge that Zachary has. He really subscribes that idea of put out your best stuff for free, document the journey, all these concepts that Gary Vee is a big fan of, but he does a really great job of documenting his journey. He brings on some really high profile and great guests. And like Ed Milet, I think Jocko Willink has been on his show, and it's got this theme of being an underdog. And listen, just because the deck is stacked against you does not mean you cannot be successful. It's going to be harder, but that's where the underdogs get together. He's got a cool little theme song. I like his intro. Underdog Empowerment by Zachary Babcock. It's under the radar. You should check it out. I've even had Zach on the After Hours Entrepreneur show before, and he's a baller. He's a boss. He gave so many great tips on podcasting. I'm going to put a link for you here so you can check out that episode. Okay, let's move on to the second podcast. It's underrated that you should be listening to, and that's The Future by Chris Do, and that's The Future with no E. I can't tell you how much I have learned from Chris. Chris is just a spectacular human being, and what The Future is it's really designed to help creators monetize their creative and how to get the most the most bang for their buck, the most value for their time, really. And as creators, it can be really easy to get pushed around, or you take a job that you're maybe not comfortable with, or you don't get paid enough. A lot of creators are introverted and they are not sales oriented. So Chris Do does a really fantastic job of bridging designers and creators with actual business and bringing them together. And I can tell you, for me, Chris Do's content has helped a lot. That's The Future by Chris Do. If you have not listened to it, you need to check it out. He is just a genius. He's very good at what he does. And I don't think I know of anyone who's as transparent with giving valuable information. Like, you can listen to an episode and you walk away with like things that are legitimately going to help you grow your business, just like on the After Hours Entrepreneur. So that's Chris Do and The Future. The next show I want to talk about is one you've probably heard of before, and that's Smart Passive Income by Pat Flynn. And I've been listening to Smart Passive Income for a long time. I don't listen to every episode, but I mean, Pat Flynn, he's like he's like the OG of podcasting. So if you are either getting into podcasting now or you've been in it for a while, Pat Flynn is someone that you definitely want to keep an eye on. He's been on my show. I've been on his show. And the Smart Passive Income is a great podcast for anyone that's trying to, develop smart passive income, whether that's affiliate marketing, whether that's websites, courses, whatever you're trying to do. And it goes a little bit broader than that, but the Smart Passive Income podcast by Pat Flynn is a must listen. All right. So the fourth underrated podcast we're going to talk about is called Built for Tomorrow by Jason Pfeiffer. Jason was another guest on the After Hours Entrepreneur. He's the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. And as an editor-in-chief, he loves his editing. And so his show, Build for Tomorrow, is really cool. He kind of it's like an investigative journalism type of show almost, in which he takes some sort of faux pas, some sort of thing that we maybe take for granted, or it doesn't really make sense, something that we have in our world that just doesn't really make sense. And he kind of researches as to why or how we got there. And it's just really interesting the way that Jason formats his show, because most podcasts that are business related or by business people, they're straight business. And they, like me, put a lot of emphasis on putting lots of content out there. But Jason is very editorial, and he's flipped his stance up and focuses more on the editing and the beauty of podcasting. So he only releases one episode a month, and they are heavily, heavily edited. It's a really interesting take. It kind of reminds me of Guy Raz and How I Built This. Although, Jason Pfeiffer doesn't have a huge staff helping him with the show. But Build for Tomorrow by Jason Pfeiffer, he's the editor-in-chief over at Entrepreneur Magazine, definitely worth checking out. The fifth podcast that is underrated and you should check out is the Patrick Bet David podcast. I've been listening to Patrick Bet David on YouTube for quite a while. His channel Valuetainment really helps business owners to build brand. He runs a very large life insurance company called PHP, where he has tons and tons of employees that are selling products and services. But what I really love about what PBD, as we all call him, or Patrick Bet David, what I really love about Patrick Bet David is he puts a huge emphasis on media, on digital media, on social media, on the power of podcasting and YouTube. And I think that a lot of business owners don't fully recognize that. And Patrick Bet David is all in, millions of followers. And again, maybe not underrated, because most people have heard of Valuetainment. They've heard of the Patrick Bet David podcast, but it's one that I think brings interesting conversation to the forefront. One of the things I like about Patrick Bet David too is he's not afraid to speak to anyone. Democrat, Republican, entrepreneur, capitalist, socialist. He'll bring on, Rudy Giuliani one week, and the next week he brings on a mafia boss like Sammy the, I can't remember his last name, but anyway, Sammy the something. Sammy the was a mobster, big time mobster. So anyway, Patrick Bet David show, very interesting, very compelling. And it kind of gives you, I think, a somewhat more neutral view on current events and what are happening. So Patrick Bet David podcast, Patrick Bet David just got onto the Joe Rogan podcast, which is not on this list because, that's not really underrated. That's a huge podcast. So Patrick Bet David podcast starring, you guessed it, Patrick Bet David. And the next show on the list is Quick Brain by Jim Quick. And this show is recommended to me from one of the guests in the Clubhouse room. And I just think it's a great show. I think that anything, and I kind of mentioned this earlier in the episode today, junk in, junk out. If you're not putting the right stuff into your brain, the wrong stuff is going to come out. And this is the type of stuff that Jim focuses on his show. His goal is to maximize the power of your brain, to get the most efficacy, the most efficiency out of what your brain can do. And that's what Quick Brain by Jim Quick is all about. I would definitely check it out. And it's not quick like Quick, it's Quick, Kwik, and his name is Quick. So interesting title. I will say, unless you're famous, I don't recommend going with clever titles. So Jim, that's a quick knock against you. But he is kind of a well-known person, so you can kind of get away with it. But anyway, I find that when it comes to titles of podcast, clarity is king, cleverness will kill. So at any rate, Jim Quick, Kwik, check it out. Quick Brain. The next podcast that was recommended is almost half podcast, half Clubhouse room, and this is Breakfast with Champions. And Breakfast with Champions is one of the largest Clubhouse rooms, one of the largest Clubhouse clubs on Clubhouse, which you have probably seen or heard me on before. And Glenn Lundy runs it. There's a bunch. It's kind of like a movement now, though. It's grown into something larger than just one person. And Breakfast with Champions is definitely something you want to check out. They host, again, a ton of rooms on Clubhouse, which is somewhere that I think that you should be, although you don't want to be passive. You don't want to be sitting on the sidelines. If you join a Breakfast with Champions room, you want to be DMing people, messaging people, getting active in the back channel on Clubhouse. But you can also listen to the podcast too, Breakfast with Champions. It was recommended to me. I'm recommending it to you, and that's how your podcast gets seen. Breakfast with Champions, check it out. Okay, and the last podcast that is on our list of recommended listenings, underrated shows, is My First Million by The Hustle and Sean Puri. Quite frankly, solid podcast, well over 1,000 5-star reviews, and something that you should be checking out. I think I haven't listened to a lot of it, but I have listened to some, and it sounds like solid advice. The sound quality is good. And I think that My First Million is definitely worth checking out. It was recommended to me by Sebastian Rusk, who knows his podcasting. And yeah, that's another show you should listen to. So that's what today was all about. Just paying it forward, telling you some unexpected or underrated podcasts that I'm thinking about. And listen, stay tuned. We got some really exciting stuff coming, some great guests lined up. I'm here to help you create better content in less time and turn that attention into income. And we're going to be bringing you a lot more of that. So have an awesome day. I'll catch you here next time. This is Mark Savant signing off. Peace.